Hello, my name is Alyssa Dirksen, and I'm an undergraduate research assistant working under the supervision of Dr. Madison Pazowski at the University of the Fraser Valley. Today I'll be presenting our work titled Children Consider Cost to Owners When Reasoning About Ownership Transgressions. Ownership plays an important role in shaping our behaviors and interactions with objects. This is because owners have the right to use and modify their property and decide who can interact with their property. Non-owners, however, do not have these rights, which means that it's typically unacceptable for people to interact with others' property without permission. Previous research shows that by ages 2 and 3, children already demonstrate a sensitivity to these rights. For instance, they protest and intervene when somebody takes property that isn't theirs, and they expect owners to take and use their own property. However, recent findings suggest that children don't find all interactions with another person's property unacceptable. Instead, they consider whether the interaction may benefit the owner. For example, it was found that children believe that it's acceptable to repair an owner's broken property without their permission. These recent findings suggest that ownership reasoning may involve a cost-reward framework consistent with the naive utility calculus. That is, people reason about others' actions by weighing the rewards gained and the costs incurred. For instance, children in the earlier example might have believed it was acceptable to fix someone's broken object without permission because the reward outweighed the cost to the owner. To test the possibility that people may reason about ownership using this calculus, we examined children's and adults' acceptability judgments of non-owners' interactions with owned property by manipulating the cost to the owner. Specifically, we asked, do children consider the costs imposed on owners when evaluating the acceptability of ownership violations? If children are sensitive to these costs, then actions should be judged as less acceptable as the cost to the owner increases. Using a within subjects design, 72 3 to 8-year-old children and 72 adults saw 6 stories involving 2 characters and an object situated between them. In each story, one character owned the object, and the other character, the non-owner, interacted with it in some way. Again, we manipulated the cost imposed on the owner as a result of the interaction. In some stories, the non-owner did not have any physical interaction with the owned object, meaning the interaction didn't impose a cost on the owner, henceforth referred to as no transgression trials. For example, the non-owner looked at the object. In other stories, the non-owner would touch or alter the object in some way, imposing a small or a temporary cost on the owner, henceforth referred to as minor transgression trials. For example, the non-owner drew on the object. And finally, in other stories, the non-owner would prohibit the owner's access to their own object, imposing a large or permanent cost on the owner, henceforth referred to as severe transgression trials. For example, the non-owner took the object home. After each story, participants would make judgments about the acceptability of the non-owner's action using 2 thumb scales. First, participants were asked to indicate whether the action was good or bad, and then indicate how good or bad the action was depending on their response. If children believe interacting with others' property is always bad, perhaps because they've created a heuristic or a rule, then they should view all of these interactions as equally unacceptable. However, if children reason about ownership violations using a cost-reward framework, then their evaluations on the y-axis should reflect how costly the actions were to the owner across the 3 trial types on the x-axis. Specifically, they should view actions that impose large and permanent costs as less acceptable than those that impose small or temporary costs, and those that do not impose any costs at all. And that is exactly what we found. Children and adults judged the minor transgressions as less acceptable than the non-transgressions, and they also judged the severe transgressions as less acceptable than both the minor and non-transgressions. Taken together, these evaluations reflect a graded sensitivity to the cost imposed on owners, rather than finding all ownership violations equally unacceptable. When examining children's judgments across childhood, we also saw age effects, whereby children's negative evaluations of the severe transgressions increased across age, while evaluations of minor and non-transgressions remained similar across age. Overall, these findings suggest that children and adults don't believe that all ownership transgressions are equally unacceptable, but rather they consider the costs imposed on owners when evaluating the acceptability of interactions with owned property. As such, these findings provide preliminary evidence that children's concept of ownership may be embedded into their broader social cognitive framework of naive or intuitive psychology. Specifically, children as young as 3 years old appear to reason about ownership using the cost-reward framework of the naive utility calculus, where they're actively weighing the cost to decide what is and what is not acceptable. We would like to thank the participating families, our research assistants, and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada for making this project possible. I look forward to chatting with you in our interactive Q&A box, but for now, thank you for listening.